Good afternoon and welcome to my library. This is Felicity, who you really can't see because at the moment I am holding up the camera to show a very large set of stacks of books which I finally culled from all their little holes in the library where they were residing. In my library, the rule is uh, it is a truth universally known that any hole in a shelf is desirous of having a book to fill it. Sorry, Jane Austen. I need to get this back organized again. So I think that somebody on Instagram did me a favor by saying, oh, by the way, Felicity, I don't suppose you'd like to put together a little stack of memoirs. I'm bored and I'd like to see your stack of memoirs. Maybe everybody's got a stack of memoirs. And I said, oh, sure. I don't think I have too many, maybe one or two or three. It won't be very impressive. And a day and a half later, apparently I had that giant stack that you see back there somewhere in excess of 60. So 60 is a lot of books for a topic or a genre that I didn't think I had any of at all. And that is memoirs. So as I was looking through my library, looking on every shelf, because although fiction is more or less isolated in one place, sometimes fiction does get confused because an author of fiction might also write some nonfiction, such as Umberto Eco, who might write The Name of the Rose, but he also wrote How to Travel with a Salmon, or in this case, Confessions of a Young Novelist, which ended up in this stack because that is a memoir or a set of stories about his own life. So I expanded the very narrow description of memoir in my head to also include stories of various events in your life in an essay form, but only if those essays, each one of them was spoken in first person about yourself and about what else was going on. And then it wasn't a series of, say, interviews with famous people for the purpose of interviewing those famous people, and was not biography, which is also fascinating in its own right, but it is definitely in the third person, even if interviews are involved. So there you go. I collected together in the various disparate sections of my very large and spread out library all over the house, and I found pretty much everything that I thought would work. And when it was all stacked together on the table, it was a really impressive pile. And you can go and see on my Instagram account, McCarthy Felicity, you can see the results of that. It covers my entire library table. Wow. And somebody else, I'm pretty sure that was Kama & Co., said, oh, Felicity, you ought to do, you made a tag. It's called Memoir Mondays or Monday Memoirs or some such thing. You should do a memoir. You should talk about one of your books in that memoir category every Monday. And I said, no, I never get through it all. It would be too long, and I would do it forever, and it would be a boring job, a task. And I think, well, whatever. So says I probably won't continue. I never finish anything. Well, almost anything. But I thought I would start with not one. I'm counting them here on the table. 2, 4, 6. I have 7 here. That's a week's worth of Mondays. 7 books, which I classify in various different kinds of memoirs, including travelogues spoken from the first person. And I have a little bit of each one, and I'll try to kind of like talk a little bit about each one of those 7, not take too long. And I have, most of them have a tiny little excerpt that I'm going to read because it kind of gives the flavor of the writer, and these all have the advantage of being ones that I've actually read some of them more than once. Anyway, I'm going to start with one that everybody ought to love. This one is Exlibris by Anne Fadiman, and I saw this at our local thrift store, library store, and just said, I need this. Looked inside, and that was a no-brainer. Anne Fadiman is the daughter of Clifton Fadiman, who wrote a couple of like all the books you need to read. I think it was, oh yes, the Lifetime Reading Plan. There's a curiosity for you. But he also wrote 2 absolutely delicious books on mathematical puzzles and problems. One was called The Mathematical Magpie, which it's great. Actually, bits of it are tongue-in-cheek witty, really, really funny. Anyway, so Anne Fadiman, the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. And in this case, this here is Exlibris. Oh yeah, Confessions of a Common Reader. I'm going to read a little bit of the blurb in the front cover, which is nice and then a little excerpt from the beginning of the book written by herself. So the blurb at the top starts with a little quote. Of all addictions, bibliophilia is the noblest and most dangerous. In Anne Fadiman, the disease is found in most engaging chronicler and analyst, Alain de Botton. Oh yeah. And the blurb begins, Anne Fadiman is, by her own admission, the sort of person who learned about sex from her father's copy of Fanny Hill, whose husband buys her 19 pounds of dusty books for her birthday. Good man. And who once found herself poring over a 1974 Toyota Corolla manual because it was the only written material in her apartment that she had not read at least twice. So the selection that I picked out, some of them I kind of went through and found things farther at the back, but this just starts with a bang so well. The first, I'm going to call it, for want of a word, they're essays. It's not an essay, it's a chapter. This one is entitled Marrying Libraries. A few months ago, my husband and I decided to mix our books together. We had known each other for 10 years, lived together for 6, been married for 5. Our mismatched coffee mugs cohabited amicably. We wore each other's t-shirts, and in a pinch, socks, and our record collections had long ago miscegenated without incident. My Josquin de Pré-Botets cozying up to George's Worst of Jefferson Airplane, to the enrichment, we believed, of both. But our libraries had remained separate, mine mostly at the north end of our loft, his at the south. We agreed that it made no sense for my Billy Budd to languish 40 feet from his Moby Dick, yet neither of us had lifted a finger to bring them together. We had been married in this loft, in full view of our mutually quarantined Melvilles, promising to love each other for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, even promising to forsake all others. Had been no problem, but it was a good thing the Book of Common Prayer didn't say anything about marrying our libraries and throwing out the duplicates. That would have been a far more solemn vow, one that probably would have caused the wedding to grind to a mortifying halt. Anne Fadiman, the whole book is like that. Absolutely witty, kind, erudite, that's a good word. Beautiful use of language, not uptight, not talking down to you, just little anecdotes, little commentaries. This is my life. I live my life with books. And if you don't, good for you, but look at me. Anne Fadiman, Exlibris. So that is one kind of memoir, which is little tiny snippets and scraps from her life, not told as letters, as a preface to talking about some other much more important thing, but that these are things, this is something about her, describes her life, the author's life, as it has proceeded so far. So the next one is, we can call this one pretty much a straight up, oops, I can't do about this glare. This is, yeah, I don't know. Whatever. This is really a memoir. This is talking about this. This is written by Edward O. Wilson near the end of his life, still definitely writing and researching and doing all of the things that a wonderful scientist would do. But this particular book is looking at his life from the beginning of it to where he was up to, where he was at when he finished the book, which was as a very, very well-respected scientist emeritus professor from some institutions. And so this is Naturalist by Edward O. Wilson, and there you go. A little blurb, just in case any of you don't actually happen to know who Edward O. Wilson is. Edward O. Wilson, university professor at Harvard, winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes, eloquent champion of biodiversity, is arguably, and of course now was because he just died, arguably one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century. His career represents both a blueprint and a challenge to those who seek to explore the frontiers of scientific understanding. Yet, until now, little has been told of his life and of the important events that have shaped his thought. And I actually just chose the first couple of moments from the prelude. The prelude is actually the chapters. The chapters have titles that take you again from practically from the beginning, from when he was 5 or 6 years old to talking about very important biodiversity, scientific issues, ecological issues, and he pretty much, for somebody who was born so long ago, he really actually was at the forefront of thinking about what we were doing wrong and what we could do right with the technology and with the knowledge that we have, which we haven't quite figured out yet. Anyway, the very beginning of his book starts thus. I have been, as the physicist Victor Weisskopf once said of himself, a happy man in a terrible century. My preoccupation was not, however, with nuclear swords and breathtaking technological advances, but of a wholly different kind. I have served as a close witness to fundamental changes in nature. Nature, the capital N. The concept for me, it holds two meanings. When the century began, people could still easily think of themselves as transcendent beings. Dark angels confined to earth awaiting redemption by either soul or intellect. Now, most or all of the relevant evidence from science points in the opposite direction, that having been born into the natural world and evolved there step by step across millions of years, we are bound to the rest of life in our ecology, our physiology, and even our spirit. In the sense, the way in which we view the natural world, nature, capital N, has changed fundamentally. When the century began, people still thought of the planet as infinite in its bounty. The highest mountains were still unclimbed, the ocean depth never visited, and a vast wilderness stretched across the equatorial continents. Now we have all but finished mapping the physical world, and we have taken the measure of our dwindling resources. In one lifetime, exploding human populations have reduced wildernesses to threatened nature reserves. Ecosystems and species are vanishing at the fastest rate in 65 million years. Troubled by what we have wrought, we have begun to turn in our role from local conqueror to global steward. Nature, in this second sense, our perception of the natural world as something distinct from human existence, has thus also changed fundamentally. Now, this was written, I should say this was published in, this is Island Press in California. This was published in 1994. So that was, I think this one was actually, this is not a first edition or anything exciting like that, but you know, might be close. But he is, that was more than 20 years ago, and things have kind of escalated a bit since then. And have we learned anything? I don't know. But this book, I personally think, is well worth reading. To read about a scientist, a true scientist, not just a weekend poker, who took his studies very seriously and came through to the other side realizing that we are not the kings of the planet. So good for Edward O. Wilson. I think he must have been a great guy. I wish I had known somebody like that. But there you go. He's gone now. Left a lot of books behind. So this is his memoir, his autobiography. It's a cross between the two. An autobiography for me always seems like it's a more formal statement. This is my life. I am doing this so that some other fool doesn't write it for me. On the other hand, for me, a memoir is a more personal, almost like a diary, but not in a day-to-day form. There's some diaries, actually I think I have one or two in the collection behind there, not in today's take, that are diaries which definitely serve as a memoir. There's another kind of memoir or autobiography. Actually, I think memoir goes in the other direction to something which I think of as being a literary travelogue. I have a ton of them because I love literary travel guides, and we're talking about guides like Rough Planet. Here's how you get to this city in Scotland. Here's how you find the museum in Austria. Those are practical guides with maps and so forth. And although fascinating in their own right, that is not a memoir. That is not a personal exploration. And I also think of personal explorations that are not travels, but this maybe travels in your head or within your craft or within your art, which I have a couple here. But this is personal exploration, which is taking place in space as well as time. So Eothen was one that I finished last year, and I can't remember why I picked it up, but it seemed like he seemed interesting and added to a very large number of other travel memoirs I have, Ibn Battuta being one of them, and of course Freya Stark and our friend Bill Bryson, who's absolute delight anyway. So there's that. But Eothen is the one I picked because it's not one of the usual ones, and I have read it cover to cover. And I even remember when I was reading it last year, it was sitting there looking at my Robert Graves Greek myths that I just obtained, going like, I need to finish Eothen so I can go ahead and read that. But then I got stuck on this, and it was great. I finished it up. So I'm going to read the back of this one. This is a little interesting blurb. It just describes what sort of a fellow. And this actually also describes a time, if I want to think of it sometimes as the golden age of literary travel, when people, mostly men, but in Freya Stark's case, women, would have an idea. They wanted to set out and find some part of the planet, part of the globe that was unspoiled or as yet relatively untraveled, that felt like it was traveling in time, or that weren't too many people around, or there was some hardship involved. And we're sort of talking about the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, before the world changed. Anyway, so this is the memoir of Alexander William Kinglake, Eothen, and the little snippet here. In the autumn of 1834, Alexander William Kinglake and a friend, John Seville, recently back from a trip to Russia, Persia, and India, set out for Turkey and the Levant. The two young men went by way of Berlin, Prague, and Vienna to Semlin, where, having crossed the river Sav and now in Ottoman territory, they proceeded to Belgrade. At Smyrna, Seville was called home, and Kinglake, with his guide and interpreter, went on by himself, by ship, to Cyprus and Beirut, then to the Holy Land, Cairo, and finally Damascus. As Barbara Krieger points out in her introduction, with Seville gone and Kinglake on his own in a foreign world, the trip suddenly became something different. Out of those experiences came Eothen. This remarkable book inaugurates and continues to exemplify travel writing, such as it has been practiced, down to our own time. Eothen, which means from the early dawn or from the east in Greek, has the freshness of the immediate and the new. Kinglake has kept it free of the details of geography, history, science, politics, religion, and statistics. It does not seek to edify and has no pretensions to authority. It is far less about the countries and cities Kinglake passes through than it is about himself. Kinglake's solitary travels become the occasion for prolonged self-scrutiny, for liberation. This is what makes Eothen a truly modern travel book, possibly the first and certainly one of the greatest of its kind. That's pretty good. So the little snippet is again from the preface. I did not actually pick anything that he wrote to quote yet. So this is interesting for another reason. In his preface, Kinglake tells us that he made 2 unsuccessful attempts at starting a book about his travels to the East, and then realizing that his failure resulted from his not knowing to whom he was addressing himself. Well, now that sounds kind of like the whole video thing for BookTube, doesn't it? Or any kind of video. I'm sitting here looking at the camera, and I'm going, stutter, because, well, who am I talking to? Am I talking to myself? Because my head goes a lot better than that. No, I have to imagine that there's somebody out there beyond my library, beyond all the books that you see behind me, somebody, you, that I'm talking to, and telling this really interesting thing, which is this book that I'm reading in this case, or maybe if I'm playing the viola, or if I'm showing you some snippet or that I've just sewed, or some bit or piece from my bench that this is really interesting, and I'm showing you this object. Anyway, so this is interesting. So this is Kinglake tells us straight out. This is how he finally made a successful book, is I figured out who I was talking to, who's my audience. Good for him. Anyway, so it's actually really good. So that was Eothen by Alexander William Kinglake. All right. So then here's another straight out memoir. This is by one of our favorite authors as a kid, Roald Dahl. Boy, Tales of Childhood. And most of us, even those of us with very peculiar upbringings, ran into Roald Dahl and his absolutely phenomenal, wonderful children's books that are sometimes a little bit astringent. Matilda, James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Oh, Matilda. Oh, the aunts in the Giant Peach, they get theirs. There's no soft shoeing around any of the things. Roald Dahl says it like it is. He said, bad guys get theirs, good guys get theirs. Excellent. Well, this is actually the story, his story of his own life. So this boy, and then going solo, has his memoir about as a young adult and older adult flying in World War II, I think. Was it II? Yeah, of course it was. Sorry. Right. So this one is. I'm not gonna. Actually, I am. I am. So these blurbs are actually usually pretty good. So. Here's a quote from Roald. Throughout my young days at school and just afterwards, a number of things happened to me. Some are funny, some are painful, some are unpleasant. All are true. There you go. That's a real memoir. And his memoir it's not an autobiography. It is definitely a whole bunch of stories strung together as only Roald Dahl can do. And it is telling the story of his life. The one that I turned to just randomly plucked out of the blue, like, oh my goodness, this is from a chapter called A Drive in a Motor Car. And what has just happened is they've gotten in a crash and his nose got cut off. So this is the passage where his mother kind of takes charge of the situation, and she drives him to the local hospital, and she's just pushed the Eggman out of the way, and there they are. So there they are. The ancient sister, who must have been one of the ones in the car, managed to straighten the vehicle and get it pointed in the right direction, and then at last the once magnificent automobile tottered down the highway and headed for Dr. Dunbar's surgery in Cathedral Road, Cardiff. I've never driven in a city, the ancient and trembling sister announced. You're about to do so, my mother said. Keep going. Proceeding at no more than 4 miles an hour all the way, we finally made it to Dr. Dunbar's house. I was hustled out of the car and in through the front door with my mother still holding the blood-stained handkerchief firmly over my wobbling nose. Good heavens, cried Dr. Dunbar. It's been cut clean off. It hurts, I moaned. He can't go around without a nose for the rest of his life, the doctor said to my mother. It looks as though he may have to, my mother said. Nonsense, the doctor told her. I shall sew it on again. Can you do that? My mother asked him. I can try, he answered. I shall tape it on tight for now, and I'll be up at your house with my assistant within the hour. Huge straps of sticking plaster were strapped across my face to hold the nose in position. Then I was led back into the car when we crawled the 2 miles home to Llandaff. About an hour later I found myself lying upon that same nursery table my ancient sister had occupied some months before for her appendix operation. Strong hands held me down while a mask stuffed with cotton wool was clamped over my face. I saw a hand above me holding a bottle with white liquid in it, and the liquid being poured onto the cotton wool inside the mask. Once again I smelled the stickly stench of chloroform and ether, and a voice was saying, "Breathe deeply. Take some nice deep breaths." I fought fiercely to get off that table, but my shoulders were pinned down by the full weight of a large man. The hand that was holding the bottle above my face kept tilting it farther and farther forward, and the white liquid dripped and dripped onto the cotton wool. Blood-red circles began to appear before my eyes, and the circles started to spin round and round till they made a scarlet whirlpool with a deep black hole in the center. And miles away in the distance a voice was saying, That's a good boy. We're nearly there now. We're nearly there. Just close your eyes and go to sleep. I woke up in my own bed with my anxious mother sitting beside me, holding my hand. I didn't think you were ever going to come around, she said. You've been asleep for more than 8 hours. Did Dr. Dunbar sew my nose on again? I asked her. Yes, she said. Will it stay on? He says it will. How do you feel, my darling? Sick, I said. After I had vomited into a small basin, I felt a little better. Look under your pillow, my mother said, smiling. I turned and lifted a corner of my pillow, and underneath it, on a snow-white sheet, there lay a beautiful golden sovereign with the head of King George V on its uppermost side. That's for being brave, my mother said. You did very well. I'm proud of you. All right, anyway, boy, Roald Dahl's memoir of his life as a young boy. That's really great. Soul was pretty good too, but boy was even better. Crazy stuff. All right, so I got 3 more here. So the next one is from my past, when I still bought a lot of books on music and musicians and by musicians, because I was studying music, and there you go. That's what you do when you're studying music. So this is a memoir by Gary Graffman, a pianist that probably nobody's really heard of anymore, because that was definitely before my time, and my time is probably older than yours, called I Really Should Be Practicing, and the title of the book is so excellent. Yeah. I really should be practicing, which is what the student, the professional musician always says. You know, you get to a certain point in the day, last time you practiced was a certain while ago, and then you start feeling that anxiousness of, if I don't pick up my instrument or sit down on my instrument really soon, it's all going to flow away. So there you go. I really should be practicing. It's great. This is a great memoir. This is Gary Graffman talking about from his youth to when, I guess he was, I don't think he might have been retired. He might have still been teaching, was it Juilliard or one of those lovely, lovely institutions. And he wrote a book. This is about I think this is the only book he wrote that was not exercises for students or what have you, but about his life. So impishly witty and refreshingly frank, Gary Graffman, internationally known concert artist, looks back on wonderful memories of musical giants Toscanini, Heifetz, and Rachmaninoff, recalls later friendships with Van Cliburn, Horowitz, George Zell, and Eugene Ormandy, and remembers both the extraordinary and unexpected in 30 years of concert tours that took him around the world from Baden-Baden to Bora Bora. A deliciously funny memoir filled with peppery anecdotes and heartwarming reminiscences of the greatest virtuosos of our time. Now, those guys you have heard of. Right, I think one of the reasons that Gary Graffman's concert career was cut a little short is that he had an accident, a smallish accident with one of his hands that then turned kind of ugly, and it turned into some like the trigger event for a condition, a disease that made it not possible for him to really be a concert player anymore. So here's a little snippet. This is Pianist in the Basement. This was okay. This is at the Osaka Festival. He's in Japan there. Actually, no dates here. It's timeless. It's sometime. Anyway, so after the first movement of the concerto thudded to a close. Oh, look at that. Okay, no. I found myself at rehearsal faced with an instrument that was both dull and ugly, a rare combination. After the first movement of the concerto thudded to a close, I peered into the darkened auditorium for Louis Lane, Zell's associate conductor, who could always be relied on for as piercingly honest an opinion as that of his older colleague. I spied him prowling around and called his name. He frowned up at me with an expression of intense distaste. Does this piano sound as awful as I think it does? I asked him. Actually, Gary, he replied in measured tones, I can hardly hear you at all, but I must say that when I do, I wish I hadn't. Oops. When the rehearsal was over, we approached the Japanese gentleman in charge of the concert. Isn't there another Steinway we could try? We asked him. Yes, he replied, looking forlorn and embarrassed. Could you take us to it? I prodded, for time was short and it seemed he wasn't going to move. He looked utterly miserable and remained motionless and silent. I tried again. Is there no other Steinway in Osaka? Yes, he repeated, becoming increasingly agitated. Then he led us to a little room backstage in which stood a Yamaha and a Bechstein. Shortly thereafter, the problem was explained to us. It is not good form in Japanese to say no. So this gentleman was merely replying to my question most accurately. Yes, yes, yes. There is no other Steinway in Osaka. Oh dear. I played that concert on a Yamaha. Gary Graffman. I really should be practicing. I have to read this one again. I haven't read it for, several years. Last time I read it was probably when I was at the conservatory, which was a few years ago. The paper is not, it's not dying, but the paper is definitely yellowing and getting brittle. But we'll see. Anyway, there you go. That one's a fun one. All right. And this one is a memoir. It's sort of on the lines of the kind of memoir that Baz Baines or Alberto Manguel would write. A Pound of Paper, Confessions of a Book Addict. And in this case, John Baxter was also a book dealer, book collector. There's the book addict part. And this is a very, very entertaining review of some of his exploits and adventures. It's not an autobiography. And it's a memoir only so far as all of the things that happened in it happened to him. But it's not a remembering all of the things that happened in your life, except for the bit where he says, yes, he grew up in Australia, and he said that's in the kind of country environment where one person would say to the other, what shall we get Bob for his birthday? And the other person says, oh, a book? And the first person says, no, Bob's already got one of those. Right. That was, I forget, it was somewhere. I was trying to find that one because that's very funny. But I have a little excerpt, again, from near the beginning. This is here again from the blurb. This is all pretty good stuff here. In rural Australia, you try saying that 20 times fast. The rural Australia of the 50s, where John Baxter grew up, reading books was regarded with suspicion, owning and collecting them with utter incomprehension. Despite this, by the age of 11, Baxter had collected his first book, The Poems of Rupert Brooke. He'd read the volume often, but now he had to own it. This was the beginning of what would become a major collection and a lifelong obsession. So this particular volume takes us not too far into Australia, but definitely all over England and parts farther west. So the little section that I've kind of hit upon for my snippet here is this. He's just finished talking about runners. Runners are these chaps that go collecting books for a cheap price from one location, and then they take them to a bookstore and they sell them for some more money than that, but not a lot, because they know what they have. Many runners dream of owning a little bookshop, coming in at noon and spending the rest of the day chatting with old colleagues who drop by to sell them rarities at bargain prices. The reality is more like the conversation between bookseller Hugh Grant and a customer in the film Notting Hill. Customer: any books by Dickens? Grant: this is a travel bookshop. We only sell books on travel. Customer: right. Do you have the new John Grisham thriller? Grant: that is not a travel book. Customer: how about Winnie the Pooh? Right. All right, that's kind of like a taste of his style, and it is really pretty funny. Actually, I laughed uproariously the first time I read it. I think I picked this one up used at Moe's in very nice condition. The book is in perfect nick. Nobody's marked it. I get very tired of marked up books, so when I buy them for myself, I try very hard not to get marked one, and this one's perfect. So, yay, Felicity. All right, the last one I already showed in an earlier video, but I'm showing it again because this one comes under the category of etc. I'm going to call this one Memoirs Thinly Disguised. So this is not told in the first person of say Lawrence Durrell, but Lawrence Durrell was in the diplomatic trade, and these are all stories about the diplomatic trade. And I guess you get to take your pick which of the characters is he's sort of like disguised himself as. So this is etc. It's not straight out of memoir. It's not autobiography. It's not travel. It's not travel writing, but it is, in my mind, it goes actually along with two of Lawrence Durrell's that were, which was Bitter Lemons and Marine Venus. But this one is very, very funny. It's probably the funniest thing he wrote. I mean, truly the funniest thing. Just tongue-in-cheek, unbelievably funny. So there you go. I know I mentioned it in one of my videos. It probably was one of these or a few of my favorite things, because it is very, very, very read over and over and over again. Pages practically falling out. If I didn't hold them in, they would be falling on the floor. Yeah, so this is you. I'm sure that you have read some of these or know these, but anyway, here goes the blurb on the back. Lawrence Durrell needs no introduction as the celebrated author of the superb Alexandria Quartet. Indeed, which I have, and I wore out my parents' copy and ended up having to buy my own. There you go. Yet those already familiar with the transcendent novels Justine, Balthazar, Montalief, and Clea, and with the superlative travel writing found in Bitter Lemons, Prospero's Cell, and Reflections on a Marine Venus, may have missed the enchanting follies perpetrated by Mr. Durrell in these two uproarious books, now for the first time combined in one low-priced volume. Wouldn't take nothing for that journey now. In each of these 20 jeux d'esprit, the author draws upon his intimate knowledge of life in the dip corps to regale his readers with the hazards and hijinks of life among the diplomats. And the one that I chose to give a little snippet out of is called La Valise. And in this, that particular embassy that he's assigned to has discovered, like a dreaded disease, culture, and everybody has fallen into the trap and is exhibiting signs of culture. So here we go. God, how can I ever forget Madame Vanderpipf, usually the most kind and normal of wives and mothers, taking up a stance like a grenadier at Fontenoy, and after a pause declaiming in a low, deep, unspeakably slow and deep voice the opening verses of whatever it was. Old boy, the cultural heritage of the Dutch is not my affair. Let them have it, I say. Let them enjoy it peacefully as they may. But spare me from poems of 500 lines beginning Kroop der Poop. You smile, as well indeed you may, never having heard Mrs. Vanderpipf declaiming those memorable stanzas with all the sullen fire of her race. Listen. Kroop der Poop, zum Kroon der Soup, zu droen der Ooper Snoop. And so on. Have you got the idea? Perhaps there is something behind it all. Who am I to say? All I know is that it is no joke to be on the receiving end. Especially as she would pause from time to time to give a rough translation in pidgin for Smith Cromwell's benefit. Something like this. Our national poet Snuggerpoof, he says, if Holland lives forever, only how would you say heroes from the soil springing, guess? Then she would take a deep breath and begin afresh. Kroop der Poop, zum Kroon der Soup. And on it goes. Oh my goodness. So I'm laughing as I'm saying it. I'm sure that, you have to be truly amazing delivery. You'd have to just keep a really straight face, but who can do that? Anyway, that is the 7th of the memoirs and memoir-esque items that I've chosen for this afternoon's entertainment and edification. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you're watching this, no, this probably won't happen next Monday, but good try. Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.